All right, let's move on to camera settings. Check this out. Look at the back of my camera here. All the information is displayed here to help you take a good picture, to give you the right information to make good exposure decisions, and also it tells you what your camera is set at. So you have the exposure mode here, you have the f-stop, you have the shutter speed, you have your flash setting here, you have your white balance setting, you have your metering. And it tells you how many shots you have left, and most importantly, it tells you, maybe not most importantly, but as important as some of the other things, it tells you your image quality setting. So the main thing is this with the digital SLR, as you can see by this slide, you want to check your menu often, because if you're like me, you're going to be changing your settings a lot. You're going to be changing your ISO. You're going to be changing your white balance. You're going to be changing your exposure compensation. You know, again, if you're like me, you're going to be having so much fun taking pictures, you might forget, and even pros make mistakes sometimes, by the way, you might forget what one of your settings was, so you want to check your menu often. So, for example, look at the white balance setting. When you set your camera up for white balance, what you're doing is you're telling the camera that you want all the whites to be white. Now, if all the whites are white, what happens? All the other colors are the right color. That's right. So, if you're outdoors, you really want to set your white balance to sunny. If it's cloudy, you want to set it to cloudy. If you're shooting in the shade, you want to set it to shade. If you're shooting by tungsten, fluorescent, whatever. Now, if you're like me, and I hope you're like me when it comes to your image quality setting, you want to shoot RAW, of course you could change the white balance setting in Camera Raw. One of the advantages to shooting RAW files. But if you shoot JPEG files, it's especially important to set your white balance setting. But look what happens here. I was out west in Zion National Park, a beautiful place to photograph. I know my friend Scott Kelby's been out there. Actually, he got the same picture of a tree that I got out there, and I like his picture actually a little bit better. But anyway, on the left here you see the daylight white balance setting. Now it was daylight, and on the right you have the cloudy white balance setting. The color isn't exactly 100% correct with the cloudy setting, but what happens is that warms up the picture. It's like putting a warming filter on your camera. So, if you like warmer quality pictures, what you want to do is you want to set the white balance setting to cloudy when you're shooting on a sunny day. Here's another example of the white balance setting. I was in Galapagos. I wanted to capture this beautiful scene. It was midday, so I set my white balance to daylight and I got the accurate colors. But look what happens when I set the white balance to tungsten. It looked like I was out there maybe at midnight with my camera set up on a tripod. So if you want accurate color, you want to set the white balance to the exact setting for those lighting conditions. But if you want to have some fun, if you want to warm up the picture, you want to use the cloudy setting. If you want to create a moody picture, you might want to use a tungsten setting or one of the other settings. Another thing that the menu tells you on the back, it tells you not to take the card out of the camera when the pictures are being written from the buffer onto the memory card. So it's very important to check that menu very, very carefully. Another important setting is the ISO setting. Look at all the ISO settings that I have on my camera, and you probably have ISO settings just like this. 100 to 1600. Listen, when I used to shoot film, I would take dozens and dozens of rolls of film with me so I could shoot at 100, 125, 200, 400, 1600, all these different settings. The thing is this, I always shoot at the lowest possible ISO setting to get the cleanest possible handheld shot. So the lowest possible ISO setting indoors may be 1000, but I'm choosing the lowest possible ISO setting, again, to get the cleanest possible shot. But I always check my menu when I change locations, so I'm getting that low ISO setting. For example, look at this picture on the left. I was out west. This is a bright situation, so I'm using a bright light situation. I'm using a low ISO setting, ISO 100. Look at the picture on the right. I was on a beautiful mountaintop in Montana. I was shooting here at ISO 800 because I was taking a handheld shot. So think about what the ISO settings do. Let me show you a few more examples. I was shooting in India. I took this beautiful picture of the Palace of the Winds. It was a sunny day. I used the ISO setting of 100. Now, after the sun sets, you have to boost up your ISO. I was in Miami's South Beach. I took this picture at ISO 400. Talk about low light. I put my camera on a tripod. I took this self-portrait. I was just illuminated by one candle. So I had to set my ISO at ISO 1000. So the light level is going down, the ISO is going up. And here I photographed this model. I painted the model with light. I set the ISO at 1600. What I did is I put the camera on a tripod. I used a shutter speed of a 20th of a second, and I moved the flashlight all around her body. Speaking of low light, my camera has what's called an on-sensor noise reduction feature. So what that does is, in a low light situation, it reduces some of the noise that's associated with long exposures in low light. The thing is, what that does is it slows down the time between exposures. Actually, if I have a 20-second exposure, it might take 40 seconds to reduce the noise. So keep that in mind if you're a little hyper like me and you want to shoot a lot in low light situations. All right, let's talk about image quality. If you come on one of my workshops, you'll see me with my t-shirt, Raw Rules, because I only shoot RAW files because I want the maximum quality image. RAW files have a wider exposure latitude than JPEG files. If part of the image is overexposed by maybe a stop, I can recover that in the digital darkroom in Adobe Camera Raw. So, as you can see from this slide, we have low settings, we have medium settings, we have small settings. Some cameras show high settings, maximum image quality. The settings are different on digital SLR cameras. But what I recommend is shooting RAW files, because you can change it to a JPEG later, because you want the maximum image quality setting. Here's an example. Look at this caracara bird on the left. You can see all the beautiful details in the feathers on the bird's neck. But look at the picture on the right. All those details are blown out because the picture on the right is a JPEG file. If the highlights are overexposed and washed out with the JPEG file, guess what? They're gone forever. So this is the main reason why you want to shoot RAW files. Now, sure, you shoot RAW files, you're going to need a bigger memory card. You're going to need a bigger hard drive. You're going to need a little more time because the RAW files take longer to process. But if you're serious about your photography, you really want to follow my advice, and that's RAW Rules. However, in low contrast situations, check out these two pictures. I photographed these beautiful cats at Big Cat Rescue, not too far from Kelby Training right here in Tampa, Florida. There's not a lot of contrast in the scene. So that's when you can shoot a JPEG file. Whenever there's a lot of contrast in the scene, a big difference between the bright areas and the dark areas, that's right, RAW Rules. Okay, let's move on to talk about the drive. As you move up in a digital SLR, you can take more frames per second than you can with an entry-level digital SLR. So if you're photographing an action scene, you want to use that rapid frame advance, and the Pro camera will give you more frames per second than an entry-level camera. But even an entry-level camera might give you 3.5 frames per second. And you know what? That's pretty amazing. So the picture on the left, I took it with the rapid frame advance because I want to capture the action of this boy catching this baseball with actually 1 foot off the ground. So that's the rapid frame advance. But if there's no motion in your picture, you could set it to single frame advance. I took the picture on the right in Bhutan. The subject really wasn't moving too much. You know, I don't really like to take a lot of pictures. I like to focus in on the shot. Sure, you know, the man on the right is playing the flute. I could have, put on rapid frame advance and, taken maybe 15 or 20 pictures like I've seen some people do. But I really try to fine-tune my shots, and that's what I recommend. Sure, you can have all these rapid frame advanced cameras take 3.5 frames per second, 10 frames per second. Thing is, that's going to make your job, your editing job, a lot harder. So focus on your shots. This is very, very important.